I say to the honourable gentleman, give me this. I will not tolerate such behaviour. If you want to go out now, but if you stand again, I will order you out. Make your mind up. Either shut up and get out. I warn the honourable member that if he's protesting, carrying out to shut up a minute. Does somebody want to what wants? What's the name? Somebody want I order. Shut. Shh. Neil Hanvey, I am now naming you and Kenny McCaskill to leave this chamber. Sergeant, deal with them. Deal with them. Deal with them. Just sit down. Out. No. Sergeant at Arms, escort them out.
The Speaker of the House of Commons, once trusted for neutrality and restraint, broke tradition with a statement no one expected. Nigel Farage, the outsider, long dismissed, mocked, and pushed aside, was declared the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Karma, the man known for calm control and careful calculation, was left shattered before the nation. His authority collapsed, his image destroyed in moments. This was not ordinary news. It was history happening live, raw, and unstoppable. Westminster had carried the dull rhythm of routine, with another day of debate, another cycle of speeches, and more empty promises that never touched ordinary lives. But the instant Nigel Farage entered the chamber, the atmosphere shifted. There were no theatrics, no performance, only a sharp and steady intensity that drew every eye. It was as if everyone sensed they stood on the edge of something irreversible. When Farage spoke, silence consumed the room. His voice was steady, his words precise, cutting with clarity and giving form to what millions had long felt, but few had dared to say. The Speaker's declaration did not remain within the chamber. It spread like wildfire across the country. In homes, cafes, schools, and offices, people stared at their screens in disbelief. Some cheered, some shouted, while others froze, unable to grasp the reality before them. This was no rumor, no speculation, it was final. Nigel Farage, once treated as a protest voice, was now the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Inside Parliament, the silence was heavy. MPs shifted uneasily, faces pale, eyes fixed either on Farage or the floor. Those who had mocked and dismissed him were now exposed, powerless before his rise. Labour's benches were in chaos, whispers turning into frantic murmurs as aides passed notes with no plan, no strategy, no escape. Their leader sat still, hollow, trembling, his authority gone before the nation. Yet Labour was not the only casualty. The Conservatives, once smug in the belief that Farage would never touch real power, now faced their own humiliation. Their failures and hollow leadership were revealed by his precision. They had underestimated him, ignored his warnings, and were left broken in his shadow. They found themselves dragged into the collapse of the old order, and the chamber was no longer divided by party lines, but instead united by shock, fear, and the sudden realization that the world they had known was gone, beyond Westminster. The country erupted with reaction as social media exploded with clips of Farage's words, replayed millions of times. The trembling lips of Starmer, the Speaker's stunning declaration, the icy silence of the chamber each moment became instant history. Hashtags surged, news outlets scrambled, and commentators struggled to keep up with the scale of the upheaval. Yet no analysis could capture the raw force of what had just unfolded. It was not commentary that mattered, it was the spectacle itself. And people across Britain felt it in their bones. The old politics had crumbled. Farage, however, stood apart from the chaos. While Parliament drowned in disbelief, he remained composed, steady, and unshaken. His silence spoke louder than any celebration, for he did not need to gloat. Authority now rested with him, not because he seized it, but because the nation itself had recognized it. His very presence redefined the moment as every glance from MPs, every whisper in the chamber, and every eye glued to television screens confirmed the truth. The outsider was now the center of power. For Starmer, it was an ending written in humiliation. The man who had promised control and competence was stripped of both. His reputation collapsed, not in private whispers, but under the full glare of the public. Years of strategy, speeches, and promises disintegrated like dust, leaving only fragility. He sat slumped, frozen in disbelief, deaf to the frantic words of his aides. His story ended not with dignity, but with the merciless destruction of authority in real time. Even the chamber itself seemed smaller, crushed by the gravity of what had occurred. Centuries of tradition had been overturned, and protocols meant to safeguard neutrality lay shattered. The speaker's declaration was not merely words. It was the burial of the old order. What was once unthinkable had become undeniable, and Britain's political landscape had been transformed forever. Britain's political landscape was broken open, exposing the raw, unsettled force of change. And outside, the people understood it with brutal clarity. There was no need for pundits to explain or for spin to interpret, because the images themselves told the story with devastating simplicity. Starmer was broken, the establishment had crumbled, and Nigel Farage had risen to the highest seat of power. It was history unfolding in real time, and the entire nation was watching. By afternoon, the shock had hardened into a national storm as news bulletins cut through regular programming. Headlines screamed across every screen, and the story dominated every conversation from Westminster to the smallest villages. In cafes, on buses, and in workplaces, people replayed the same clips again and again, Starmer trembling under Farage's assault, Rachel Reeves frozen in silence, and the speaker's words shattering centuries of order. The impossible had not just been imagined, it had been declared, and the nation felt the ground shift beneath its feet. Inside number 10, the atmosphere was suffocating, with phones ringing nonstop, aides rushing through corridors, and ministers whispering in panic. Yet at the center of it all, Keir sat motionless. Reports described him staring blankly at papers he no longer cared to read, his body slumped as though crushed by humiliation. The strategist and architect of Labour's resurgence was reduced to silence, and no speech or statement could undo the devastation shown to millions. His fall was complete, not in private, but on the most public stage possible. Meanwhile, Farage's dominance only grew as he spoke no further, letting silence amplify his authority. Every camera, every eye, and every breath seemed locked on his calm figure. He had spoken not just to the chamber, but to millions across the nation, giving voice to frustrations ignored for too long. He captured the anger of working-class communities, the disillusionment of betrayed voters, the fury of citizens abandoned by an elite political order, and he transformed that rage into a force Parliament could not withstand. The Labour benches were in chaos as shadow ministers whispered frantically, but none dared rise to speak. Rachel Reeves avoided every glance, her face pale and composure broken, while others sat blankly, their careers unraveling before their eyes. Even whispers of rebellion and resignation spread among them, but it was too late. Authority had slipped from their grasp, and no reshuffle or plan could bring it back. No strategy could restore it. And the party that once promised renewal now looked like a crumbling institution, breaking apart in real time. Across the aisle, the Conservatives fared no better. Having believed they were safe in their complacency, certain that Farage could wound Labour but never threaten them, they were wrong. His attacks on their failures were devastating, his mockery of their ambitions piercing, and decades of mismanagement, empty rhetoric, and broken promises were dragged mercilessly into the light. The laughter echoing through the chamber was not relief, but fear. Fear that the same reckoning which had destroyed Labour could just as easily turn on them. Outside Parliament, the response was immediate and overwhelming as social media exploded with fury. Celebration, disbelief, and awe. Hashtags surged across platforms, videos spread like wildfire, and citizens who had long ignored politics now found themselves glued to events with fresh urgency. For the first time in decades, people felt they were seeing something real, something unscripted. Farage's rise had not been delivered through spin or backroom deals. It was raw, unfiltered, and undeniable. Around the world, observers scrambled to make sense of the shock. Foreign news networks cut into live coverage. Anchors repeated the speaker's declaration with disbelief. World leaders demanded urgent briefings, and diplomats exchanged frantic messages, all recognizing that the United Kingdom had entered an era of uncertainty unlike anything in living memory. Old assumptions about alliances, trade, and leadership were shaken. And the question on every lip was the same. How had an outsider risen so quickly, so decisively, to the highest seat of power? Back in Westminster, the answer lay in silence as Farage stood calm and unflinching, while the chamber hung suspended in disbelief. He had not staged a coup or bent rules behind closed doors. He had spoken with precision, exposed the failures of both parties, and forced the truth into the open for all to see. The speaker's declaration had not created Farage's authority. It had only confirmed what the nation already felt. The old political order was dead. The reckoning had come, and for Starmer, there was no recovery. His downfall was not the stumble of a politician who miscalculated. It was the total dismantling of his image. A collapse broadcast live, a humiliation that would be remembered for generations. The man who promised to restore control had lost everything: his authority, his credibility, even his presence as a leader. The contrast could not have been sharper. Starmer broken, Farage unshaken, and the order of British politics turned upside down. As evening fell over Westminster, the chaos only deepened. What began as a shock in the Commons had erupted into a national reckoning. News vans packed the streets, floodlights cut through the dusk, and journalists scrambled for statements that never came. Labour ministers avoided cameras, their panic etched on their faces, their silence louder than words. Conservatives fared no better, their carefully rehearsed lines drowned out by the magnitude of Farage's rise. The political class, once untouchable, now appeared fractured, exposed, and afraid. Inside Labour headquarters, despair dominated as meetings collapsed into shouting matches. Aides argued over press releases already outdated, and MPs whispered of leadership challenges that sounded hollow against the scale of disaster. No strategy could withstand the truth. Keir Starmer was finished. His carefully crafted image lay in ruins, broken not in private but before millions. Every attempt to defend him only deepened the humiliation, for the public had seen him tremble, falter, and collapse, and nothing could erase that image. The Conservatives tried to seize the moment, but their efforts rang hollow. They too had been shredded by Farage's relentless assault. His words lingering, his mockery of their failures echoing louder than any statement they could offer. Ambitious figures, once confident in their rise to power, now looked hesitant and vulnerable. For the ground beneath them had shifted, and the certainty they once relied on had vanished. They were no longer contenders but targets, waiting for the same reckoning that had destroyed Labour. Beyond Westminster, the British public was alive with conversation. In pubs, homes, buses, and on street corners, people spoke with urgency. For years they had felt ignored, drowned out by empty promises. But now, for the first time, someone had cut through the noise with clarity. Farage's words were replayed in full, not polished into sound bites, but consumed raw, unfiltered, and undeniable. Citizens long detached from politics now found themselves drawn back in, compelled by the force of what they had witnessed. Some cheered, others raged, but all were engaged, and the nation itself felt transformed. That was the true measure of the upheaval. As social media turned into a battlefield of emotion with hashtags trending worldwide, memes and clips spreading at staggering speed, and voices from every corner of the country joining the debate, Starmer's collapse was dissected frame by frame. Every tremor and hollow word replayed as proof of his downfall, while Farage's precision, his silence, and his unflinching composure became the image of strength. The old narratives spun by politicians and pundits crumbled under the weight of raw spectacle, and the people needed no interpreters to explain it, for they understood instinctively that the old politics was dead. International reaction only heightened the moment as leaders across Europe, Washington, and beyond scrambled to draft statements while diplomats exchanged frantic updates filled with urgency and confusion. For decades, Britain's politics had been predictable, its leadership steady, its transition smooth, but that certainty was gone as a man once dismissed as fringe had risen to the highest office, not by gradual ascent, but through the sudden collapse of everything around him. The world watched in disbelief, aware that the balance of power had shifted and that nothing could be assumed any longer. Inside Parliament, the mood was heavy, as if the chamber itself carried the weight of history. MPs sat restless, their conversations muted, their glances uneasy, and even the most seasoned veterans admitted in hushed tones that they had never witnessed anything like it. The old certainties and carefully choreographed rituals had dissolved, and Westminster no longer felt like the seat of control, but the epicenter of collapse where the impossible had become reality. At the center of it all stood Farage, calm and unshaken, asking for no applause and seeking no recognition. His authority did not come from the speaker's declaration, for it had already been carved out by the force of his words, his presence, and his refusal to yield. Every glance toward him confirmed what the nation already knew. The outsider had become the reckoning. The political class had no answer. The Labour leader sat broken, the Conservatives silenced, and the speaker's words still hung in the air. The shift was complete. The old Britain had ended, and a new chapter had begun as the Speaker of the House of Commons, long seen as a guardian of neutrality and restraint. broke tradition with a statement no one could have foreseen.